Hello, welcome back to another Sunday School lesson. This week we are in Ephesians, just straight up Ephesians, all of Ephesians, titled For the Perfecting of the Saints. Now, I explained this in a previous video, but I think it's important to explain it again. So, Ephesians covered a 2-week period, this one lesson did, because my church had a general conference, which is about 8 hours, every 6 months, where the general authorities of my church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, addresses the members of the church and gives them counsel and advice and talks and so on. And actually, I find it to be pretty similar to what Paul was doing in his letters, but this was distributed through modern means like television and so on. It's actually pretty cool. So I did talk a little bit about this in the previous 2 lessons. The 2 lessons back, I talked about the full armor of God, which is from Ephesians. So I won't be talking about that this time. And then in the previous lesson, I used part of the gameplay in Assassin's Creed Syndicate to demonstrate a point of that was being talked about temptation and whatnot. So this one's just going to cover the rest of Ephesians and just kind of what's deigned to be important in the lesson. Now, one thing that's pointed out in the lesson that I think is really applicable to modern days is that at the time, the people in Ephesians, the gospel caused quite a consternation amongst the people. A lot of people made good money out of believing something different, and as a result, they felt their livelihoods were being threatened by this new religion. That people would not be able to make money, that it was an active threat to them. And this seems to be very typical nowadays. As I'm making this video, there was a political debate that was held the other night. I won't go into too many details about who said what in it, or name names or anything like that, but one person essentially said, if we need to make churches who don't conform to what we believe about gay marriage. Kitty cat. So churches that don't conform to what we believe about gay marriage will have to be taken off the tax-exempt list. They can no longer be a church and be tax-exempt unless they accept all gay marriage. And now that's kind of scary for me personally because, I'm a firm believer in freedom of religion, but it seems to me that what we're getting nowadays is very similar to we're getting the same sort of consternation, the same sort of feeling against religion and religious beliefs as were had in Paul's time in Ephesia. But what Paul promised through it is that, this is in 2:13 and 14, he says that Christ is our peace. We skipped a couple words there, but that's what he says. Christ is our peace. So Christ brings peace. And that's one of the comforting things about the religion, no matter how chaotic our lives can get, and they can get really, really chaotic. Christ will bring us peace if we have faith, if we but believe. And there are times when it's really hard to believe that. I'll be the first one to admit there are times when I just go, bleh. I actually woke up this morning feeling kind of bleh. If bleh isn't an actual emotion, it should be. But yeah, you wake up, you feel blah, you feel a little down or depressed, or you feel just overwhelmed by all the stuff that's happening around you and you don't know what to do. And, if you have faith in Christ, if you have the Spirit with you, it will bring you peace. Sometimes in very startling and surprising ways. There have been times when I've been completely down, and, I've just been inspired to just sit down and play a video game, or read a book, or do something completely non-religious related, and I've come through the other end of it just feeling so much better. And that's put me in a much better state, and put me in a position where I could listen more to the Spirit, and I don't get into such a state as easily afterwards. Because that's, at least with me, when I get into a bleh state, I find it's often very easy to get out of it a little bit, then slip right back into it. And that's just me. But but when I'm inspired to do things like I said, today it was, to play a video game. When I get inspired to do things like that, I find myself more open to Spirit, and then more likely to listen to Spirit and then go out and do things that will make me feel happier, to feel less blah, to feel more, less blue, more green maybe. Red is red the opposite of blue? Red seems angry. I'm gonna go with green. Green. So feel more green rather than more blue. And it's one of the great comforts that gospel and religion brings, that I think a lot of people don't quite understand, is just the peace and the calmness it brings you, even in the worst of times, when you're going through just the worst moments in your life. You come out of it and you're like, you feel at peace and happy with the world around you, and it's just such a wonderful blessing for all of us to have. I don't know if I can emphasize that enough, or really emphasize the impact that has had on my life personally. But I suppose it's time we move on to some more doctrines in the lesson. So one of the things that Paul talked about, let me get the reference here. It's Ephesians, in First Ephesians, is about predestination and people being chosen. Now, so this is a point that I think my church differs from other churches. So modern revelation has kind of put a perspective on this that I don't think is shared by all Christian religions. So I'll try to relate what that perspective is. And it's the idea that there is predestination does not mean, or wait, let me rephrase that. Predestination or foreordination does not mean that that the people who have been predestined or foreordained are automatically saved. Nor does it mean that those who aren't predestined or foreordained will automatically not be saved. And there's a belief that I've heard from people who are Christians, but are not members of my church, who have stated that the people who didn't have a chance to learn about the gospel while they were alive, whether through, whether they lived in a time when it wasn't around, or whether they lived in a place where it just wasn't being taught, or even nowadays are living in a place where it's not being taught. Now, these people aren't just necessarily going to be damned. What modern revelation through my church has taught is that these people will have a chance in the next life to either accept or reject the gospel. They will ultimately have that choice and that chance. And this leads, I've talked about it in previous videos, it is kind of an odd thing that my church does, but this leads to the idea of performing ordinances for the dead. The most common one that's known to most people outside my religion is baptisms for the dead. So we believe that someone can be baptized by proxy. A living person can be baptized by proxy for someone who is dead. Now, this doesn't mean that that person is in the next life is automatically a member of our church and they have no choice in the matter. It doesn't mean that at all. It basically just says to them in the next life, here's the ordinance. You can accept it. You can reject it. It's entirely up to you. It presents them with the choice, gives them a chance to accept or reject it, essentially. And we firmly believe that even if you're born in a time or a place where you didn't have the gospel preached to you, as I'm sure many people who are listening to this, their ancestors were in that position. And you would want to be able to have all your family, all your ancestors saved, if at all possible. And this provides the chance. So that's what we believe, that you don't have to be foreordained or predestined or chosen or any of those things to be able to still be saved. You can still be saved. It's ultimately up to you. It's your choices that make the difference. So, seems like I'm explaining a lot of complex doctrines in this one. We also believe, this is moving on in the lesson to the second chapter of Ephesians and the fourth chapter. It talks about kind of the order of the church, essentially apostles, prophets, and so on and so forth. And we, as members of our church, we firmly believe in this. In the same organization that was established by Christ is the organization that the church should have. And modern revelation has allowed us to do that. Basically, direct communication between our prophets and God is what we believe has happened, and we believe that they have restored the church as it was it's been restored in the same way that Christ had it when he lived upon the earth. So that's what we believe, and we firmly believe that that it's the foundation of the church is this organizations of apostles and prophets and so on and so forth. But the cornerstone of the church is and always will be Jesus Christ. So that's what we kind of that's what we believe, and that's so. I'm actually kind of glad I got this out of the way. I know a few people who watch these are not members of the church, so it can be a little weird and a little awkward. But it is what we believe. But we'll move on to the stuff that I think is a little bit easier to not easier to explain, more acceptable to people regardless of what their beliefs are, and that's essentially strengthening the family relationships. And Paul talked about this in let's see. Chapter 5 and 6, Paul talks about strengthening family relationships. And it's like, and really you have to ask yourself, why is it important to have good family relationships? So, gonna go back. So when I was a kid, I read a Robert Heinlein book called Half Spacesuit Will Travel. And when I was a kid, I really enjoyed it. Now, I went back to it as an adult, and I was actually kind of shocked about how biased the story was. Not against, a group of people or something like that, but against kind of psychology and family values and, like, the family system. And it manifests in this book in, the fact that the main character was learning about family structure in school, and his father, who was a scientist, basically said, okay, you need to disregard all this. Let me teach you science. Let me teach you the real things that you should be learning. And, and I can understand learning science in school is important, but also, learning about the family structure and that sort of thing is very important. And we're seeing in this world today a breakdown of the family unit and the family structure. There are so many people. So I believe I've mentioned this before. I've worked in the mental health field, and I worked with children who range from severely abused to, kids that just need a little bit of extra help per day. There were some kids that basically didn't need me to do anything. They just needed me to be around, and that would give them enough emotional support for them to do it themselves. It's really kind of interesting in that. But, the main problem, like about 90 to 95% of the kids I worked with, they had one single problem in common, and that was a lack of a male role model in their lives. They essentially needed a father, a good father figure in their lives. Both boys and girls need this, and, ooh, I didn't even see that pole come out of nowhere. But, seems like there should be a metaphor to that. Regardless, both boys and girls need a strong male role model in their lives, as well as a strong female role model in their lives. I think everybody needs that basic structure of a family is very important, very essential. Aw, isn't that nice? See, he obviously had good parents. So yeah, you need good parents, you need a good, stable family system in place. And in today's world, we've kind of disregarded that stability, that stable family relationship as being kind of out of date and just not workable and just not a very, very good thing at all. And the sad truth is that with the breakdown of families, we see kind of breakdowns of society, more crime, more, problems that the kids are having, both emotional and physical problems tend to increase if you don't have a good support system with you, if you don't have families around to help you and support you. And yeah, it's boys learn from fathers how to be, men, how to grow up and be men. And girls learn how they should be treated by the fathers in their lives, how their husbands should treat them. And boys learn from mothers, how women should treat them, how their future wives should treat them, how their girlfriends and wives, the future of them, should treat them. And girls learn how to be good women from their mothers. And it's just such a vitally important thing that is being completely ignored in today's structure. And I think that's why it's so very important to, increase your family relationships, increase how well you treat each other, in your family. Try to build it up as best you can. And sometimes, yeah, there will be problems, and you won't be able to cope with all the problems. It's something that happens. But, you know, do what you can to help build up your family relationships, and yeah. So, and sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't work, but, you know, make the effort and do whatever you can to build it up. So, yeah, slightly darker note there. And really, that's the majority of the lesson. There's a lot of stuff I kind of skipped over, both in the lesson and in Ephesians, and that does actually happen in these lessons. They have some great moments, but oftentimes you find yourself skipping over them because there's just so much in there. So, just as a recommendation, read it for yourself. Get Ephesians out, read it, study it, pray about it, and then see where it takes you. Let me do a quick, you know, front view of Evie here. So anyway, that's the Sunday School lesson this week. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.